She is the girl who never grew up, caught between the innocence of youth and the wisdom she's too afraid to embrace. Her heart longs for freedom, but she's imprisoned by a world that celebrates her endless potential, never letting her break free. What happens when the Puella Aeterna finally faces the truth? When the mask falls away, and she must confront the woman she's been avoiding all along. This is not a story of fantasy. It is a battle for her soul, a journey towards self-discovery, and the painful yet empowering steps she must take to become the woman she was always meant to be. She walks through life as if the ground might break beneath her, not because she is weak, but because she refuses to be held by anything too real. She is the Puella Aeterna, Latin for the eternal girl. But she is no ordinary girl. She is an archetype, a psychological pattern embedded deep within the human psyche, and she lives in the women who never quite descend into adulthood. She is bright, whimsical, spontaneous, and full of possibilities. People are drawn to her. She seems untouched by the heaviness of the world. But that lightness is not freedom. It is escape. The Puella fears the weight of commitment, the boundaries of responsibility, the gravity of time. She lives in potential, not reality, and she is everywhere. In the woman who sabotages relationships because love feels too real. In the artist who never finishes her work because she fears what it might mean to be fully seen. In the dreamer who romanticizes escape more than she does embodiment. To understand the Puella Aeterna is to understand the tragedy of emotional avoidance wrapped in the costume of youth. She doesn't want to be a woman, not really. Womanhood demands that she come down from the clouds, face her shadow, integrate her pain. But the Puella has made a life out of evasion. She is a constellation of bright ideas and short-lived passions, charming lovers and abandoned commitments, big dreams and no roots. And at first it seems beautiful, even intoxicating. But behind her eyes is a quiet fear. What if I'm not enough when the fantasy fades? She has never truly chosen life because life demands sacrifice, and the Puella has sacrificed nothing. She clings to the illusion of innocence not because she is innocent, but because she is terrified of what it means to become, to mature, to be seen not as a muse but as a mirror. Carl Jung spoke of the Puella Aeternus, the eternal boy, as a symbol of divine potential and destructive avoidance. His feminine counterpart, the Puella, carries the same polarity. She is a spark of divinity trapped in a girl's refusal to suffer transformation. This series will strip away the illusions. We will walk through her defenses, her fantasies, her pain. We will explore how culture rewards her and how psychology explains her. And we will ask the only question that matters. What does it take to finally grow up without losing your soul in the process? It doesn't begin with a choice. It begins with a feeling, a weightless detachment from the world, a subtle refusal to descend fully into reality. She floats above the mess of life, refusing to root. The Puella Aeterna lives behind her eyes, not as a conscious decision, but as an unconscious enchantment. She smiles while withdrawing. She charms while hiding. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, her life becomes a stage, a performance crafted not from who she is, but from who she believes she must be to remain untouched, unbruised, unreal. The world rewards her glow. Friends admire her lightness, her innocence, her spontaneity. Men romanticize her vulnerability. She becomes the breath of fresh air in a stifling world. But what no one sees is the cost, because the Puella does not stay young by accident. She sacrifices depth for lightness, commitment for novelty, substance for image. And in her quiet moments, when no one is watching, she can feel it. A hollowness growing behind her performances, a voice whispering, "You're not really here." She dissociates not just from pain but from presence. She fears not just rejection but reality. Anything that asks her to grow roots, to suffer, to become, terrifies her. Because becoming would mean killing the fantasy. The unconscious child psyche clings to the dream that someone else will come save her. The perfect lover, the perfect opportunity, the perfect moment. But it never comes. And secretly she knows this. That's why she sabotages, why she escapes. why she flees when life asks her to stay. It's not immaturity, it's a psychological defense. The Puella Aeterna is not just a girl who won't grow up. She is a soul protecting itself from the wounds of being human. She's trapped between the desire to be seen and the terror of being known, between the hunger for love and the refusal to be changed by it. And as long as she remains unconscious of the archetype possessing her, she cannot choose a different life. That's the cruel brilliance of it. The spell works best when she believes it's who she truly is. But the moment she begins to see it, not judge it, not reject it, but see it, the spell weakens. And for the first time, she realizes, maybe she doesn't want to stay in Neverland after all. She says she wants freedom, but what she really wants is escape. There is a difference. Freedom is grounded in choice, in sovereignty, in self-possession. Escape is rooted in avoidance, in disembodiment, in fear. The Puella Aeterna lives in the illusion of the former, while unconsciously drowning in the latter. She avoids structure not because it oppresses her, but because it reveals her limits. She flees responsibility not because it bores her, but because it threatens to expose her immaturity. And she avoids love not because she cannot feel it, but because love demands that she show up as a whole person, not a fantasy. The Puella is addicted to potential. She is forever on the brink of a new project, a new city, a new lover, a new reinvention. But she rarely finishes what she starts because completion terrifies her. To complete something is to become accountable for it. And accountability requires that she confront the one thing she avoids at all costs: herself. Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's close collaborator, wrote that the eternal girl archetype refuses the sacrifice of suffering. That is her core wound. She wants the ecstasy of life without its weight, the joy of romance without the wounds of intimacy, the thrill of becoming without the fire of transformation. But psychological growth is forged through confrontation, and she has mastered the art of sidestepping confrontation, especially the inner kind. She intellectualizes her feelings, romanticizes her pain, rebrands her chaos as creativity. But these are defenses, beautiful, clever, socially acceptable defenses, and the world often rewards her for them. Social media praises her whimsy. Men romanticize her mystery, friends envy her spontaneity. But inside, she feels the cost. She secretly fears that time is passing, and she is standing still. She fears being truly known because she suspects that behind the charm lies a hollowness even she can't name. Her avoidance is not a lifestyle, it is a wound covered in glitter and dreams. The girl who never grew up did not choose immaturity, she chose safety. And that safety has become a prison. But no prison lasts forever. At some point, the fantasy breaks, and when it does, she must decide. Keep running, or finally turn toward the woman she was always meant to become. Beneath the surface of every Puella Aeterna lies a haunting presence, the shadow woman she refuses to become. This shadow is not a villain, not a monster, not some cruel internal critic. It is the mature feminine self, the version of her that holds boundaries, speaks truth, withstands discomfort, and honors reality over fantasy. But to the Puella, this figure feels threatening. Why? Because the woman she could become demands the very things the girl within her avoids: commitment, consistency, grief, responsibility. The Puella has been taught to associate maturity with dullness, with limitation, with death. In her psyche, growing up means becoming invisible, caged, undesirable. But this is a lie planted by a culture that idolizes youth, trivializes feminine wisdom, and confuses emotional regression with liberation. Carl Jung wrote that the shadow represents everything we refuse to see about ourselves. And for the Puella, that shadow includes her own strength, her own capacity for endurance, her own depth. She projects these qualities onto others, onto mentors, lovers, heroines, because to own them herself would mean stepping out of the girl role, and that means risking rejection, losing attention, facing loss. The shadow woman asks hard questions. What do you stand for? Who do you serve beyond yourself? What are you willing to suffer for? These questions are invitations, but they sound like threats to the Puella who has built her life on escape. So she numbs. She flirts with spirituality but avoids inner stillness. She flirts with ambition but avoids the discipline to manifest it. And the shadow woman waits, not with punishment but with patience, because she knows that no fantasy can satisfy the soul forever. Sooner or later the girl grows tired, not older, tired. Tired of the performative joy, tired of the endless reinvention, tired of never feeling anchored. And in that exhaustion, something shifts. The shadow woman becomes less frightening, more familiar, more like a homecoming. And when the Puella finally dares to meet her gaze, she realizes the woman she feared was not her death, it was her deliverance. The Puella Aeterna survives on fantasy. It is her lifeline, her refuge, her drug. But over time, the very fantasies that once gave her freedom begin to cage her. At first, fantasy feels like power. She can imagine herself as anyone, a famous artist, a mystical healer, a tragic heroine, a misunderstood genius. She doesn't have to become any of these things, it's enough to dream them. Her identity is fluid, unformed, ever-shifting, like water with no container. She romanticizes chaos. She calls instability passion, calls avoidance freedom, calls detachment strength. But underneath these illusions is a deep fear. What if I'm nothing without the fantasy? What if the story ends and I'm just me? That fear keeps her suspended in the air, unwilling to land. She can't commit to a relationship because the imagined version of love is more intoxicating than the real one. She can't stay in one place because the possibility of somewhere better is always more thrilling. She can't sit in silence because the noise inside would consume her. Fantasy becomes her sanctuary and her exile. It keeps her from reality but also from connection. It keeps her safe but also alone. And worst of all, it keeps her small. Because fantasy doesn't require growth. It doesn't require grief, it doesn't require sacrifice, it gives the illusion of progress without the pain of transformation. Jungian analyst Marie-Louise von Franz observed that the Puella often avoids the pain of incarnation, of actually becoming someone real in the world, because she fears the loss of possibility. But in clinging to possibility, she loses presence. She becomes a ghost in her own life, haunted by everything she could be, paralyzed by everything she never was. The longer she stays in fantasy, the more frightening reality becomes. The more idealized the dream, the more disappointing the truth. And yet the truth is the only place where meaning lives. Not in the dream of love, but in the work of love. Not in the dream of greatness, but in the daily choices that shape it. Fantasy can be a bridge, but it is not a home. And when the Puella realizes that, she begins the slow, aching walk back to her body, back to earth, back to herself. At the heart of the Puella Aeterna lies a wound that words often fail to touch. It is not always visible, but it is always there, shaping her in silence. It is the mother wound, not necessarily the absence of a mother, but the absence of a nurturing force that could mirror her inner world and help her grow into it. Sometimes the mother was emotionally unavailable, cold or dismissive. Other times she was overly enmeshed, projecting her own unlived life onto the child. In both cases, the daughter wasn't seen for who she was. She was either neglected or consumed, and so she learned to survive by fragmenting. She became what was needed, or disappeared altogether. She turned away from the pain and toward fantasy, where she could be whole, adored, free. She grew older but didn't grow up, because no one showed her how. No one taught her that limits are not punishments, but containers for love. That suffering is not the enemy but the threshold of transformation. That saying no is not cruelty but self-respect. Without that maternal mirror, she never learned to mother herself. She never learned to hold herself through fear or guide herself through change. She floats through life without anchor, without structure, and calls it freedom. But inside, she longs for a center, for ground, for the deep, unwavering presence of a mother she never had. And this longing follows her into relationships. She doesn't seek a partner, she seeks a savior, someone to finally make her feel held. But no lover can fill that hole. Because the wound isn't just about what she didn't receive, it's about what she never learned to give herself. Healing the mother wound doesn't mean blaming our mothers forever. It means grieving what we lost, acknowledging what we needed, and slowly becoming the mother we never had. The part of us that can say, I see you. I will not abandon you. I will not let you drift into nothingness. Until the Puella becomes that voice, she will always feel lost, forever seeking home in others, in dreams, in escape. But once she begins that inner mothering, the archetype starts to dissolve. Not because the pain is gone, but because someone is finally there to hold it. The Puella Aeterna often enters relationships not from a place of wholeness, but from a haunting emptiness she doesn't yet understand. She doesn't fall in love with a person. She falls in love with an idea, a rescue fantasy, a projected savior who will finally give her the approval, safety, and direction she never learned to give herself. And for a time, it feels like magic. Everything is intense, passionate, overflowing with possibility. But this isn't love. It's psychological compensation. It's the child within her crying out, "Save me from becoming an adult." As the illusion wears off, she begins to feel trapped. The structure of intimacy starts to feel like a prison, because deep down, she equates closeness with engulfment, responsibility with punishment, and maturity with death. And so she oscillates, clingy one moment, distant the next, idealizing her partner, then resenting them for not making her feel whole. She demands emotional intensity but resists emotional depth. She wants to be seen but fears being truly known, because to be known would mean revealing the inner chaos she spends her life hiding, from others and from herself. Her relationships are mirrors, and every time one ends in collapse, she walks away not with lessons but with more proof of her fantasy. That love is supposed to save you, but love is not therapy. And lovers are not parental substitutes. Real intimacy requires groundedness, compromise, presence, the very qualities she was never taught to cultivate. The Puella avoids these lessons because they demand she face the parts of herself she buried long ago. Her fear of abandonment, her refusal of accountability, her terror of aging and change. Until she faces those shadows, every relationship will feel like a playground that ends in ruins. Her partners will either become caretakers, oppressors, or fellow escapists. And even if they love her, they can't reach her because she's not there. She's still hiding inside her own dream, unwilling to come out. Healing begins when she stops looking for someone to complete her and instead asks, "What am I avoiding in myself?" Because the day she stops fleeing her own depth is the day she'll finally be capable of love, not as escape, but as truth. For the Puella Aeterna, growing up is not a simple matter of biological aging. It is a profound psychological crisis. The transition from girlhood to womanhood represents a confrontation with the self that she is terrified of facing. The pull of the archetype is strong. It invites her to step into the fullness of her identity, to embrace the power and responsibility that comes with maturity. But there is a silent, underlying dread that keeps her tethered to the fantasy of eternal youth. The fear is not of growing older. It's the fear of losing her cherished illusions, the fear of stepping into a life where the magical thinking and dreamy escape give way to the stark realities of responsibility and imperfection. In her psyche, maturity represents a loss. Loss of freedom, loss of spontaneity, loss of the cherished unpredictability that made her feel alive. In truth, however, it is the refusal to mature that holds her captive. The Puella is caught in a cycle where she resists becoming her true self, believing that in doing so, she will be swallowed whole by the adult world. But this world with its messiness and limitations is the world of individuation, the process through which she learns to integrate the fractured parts of her psyche into a cohesive, authentic self. The journey demands a relinquishing of her ideals, her need for perfection, and her refusal to confront the shadowy, repressed parts of her being. But to do so feels like an annihilation of her identity. To mature means to accept both her strengths and weaknesses, her dark and light sides, her successes and failures. It means understanding that life is not a fairy tale, but something far richer, a continuous, evolving process of growth. Until she steps out of the fantasy and accepts the call to individuation, she will remain suspended in a liminal space, always on the edge of becoming, but never fully realizing her potential. Maturity, after all, is not about escaping who you are. It's about embracing who you were always meant to be. The Puella Aeterna's journey to individuation cannot be complete without facing the very parts of herself she has long denied. The shadow, those aspects of her personality that are repressed, denied, or unacknowledged, lurks just beneath the surface of her consciousness. For the Puella, this shadow is often tied to the very traits she fears might make her unattractive or unlovable: anger, jealousy, ambition, and even the darker facets of sexuality. She clings to an idealized image of herself, one that is gentle, sweet, and unobjectionable, but this persona cannot fully embody the complexities of her real, lived experience. Her refusal to acknowledge the shadow keeps her trapped in a state of immaturity, continually chasing after a fantasy of herself that does not align with reality. In many ways, the Puella Aeterna is afraid to face the parts of her that she deems imperfect. By pushing these qualities into the unconscious, she is never able to fully experience her own depth. But the shadow is not the enemy. It is a powerful, untapped reservoir of energy, creativity, and potential. As long as the Puella denies her shadow, she remains fragmented, split between the ideal self and the self she wishes to avoid. The process of individuation, however, invites her to integrate this shadow. This is not about fixing or correcting her flaws, but rather about accepting and embracing them as part of who she is. When the Puella begins to confront these parts of herself, she starts to access a deeper layer of her being. The shadow holds the key to her maturation. It is in the acceptance of her shadow that she can truly step into her full power. It is only through this courageous confrontation that she can transcend her old illusions and emerge as the woman she was always meant to be. The journey to individuation is not about perfecting oneself. It is about wholeness, embracing the light and the dark, and understanding that maturity comes not from the absence of flaws, but from their integration. The final step in the Puella Aeterna's journey is not an endpoint, but a continuous process. The integration of all that she has learned, accepted, and transformed within herself. It is a synthesis of the persona, ego, and shadow into a harmonious whole, a fully realized self that is no longer trapped in the limitations of youth and denial. The Puella who embarks on this path learns to transcend the dualities that once defined her life, between what she shows the world and what she hides from it. She sheds the innocence of girlhood, not through rejection, but through a process of evolution, becoming the woman who carries both wisdom and vulnerability with grace. The archetype of the Puella Aeterna, in its fullest form, is not one of endless youthfulness or escape. It is one of mature, resilient femininity. She embraces the beauty of both strength and softness, the wisdom of age and the vitality of life. This is the essence of individuation, to become an integrated whole person, accepting all aspects of oneself, the conscious and unconscious, the light and the dark. As the Puella Aeterna matures, she is no longer driven by unconscious impulses or shaped by societal expectations. She moves through life with intention, deeply aware of her internal world and the impact she has on others. She understands that true freedom comes not from the avoidance of pain or conflict, but from the acceptance of both the beauty and the messiness of life. The Puella Aeterna who has fully integrated her shadow is a woman who stands in her power, unapologetically herself, and who can create deep, meaningful connections with others based on authenticity and vulnerability. The path toward individuation is never linear, but in embracing her true self, the Puella steps into a new realm of existence, one that transcends the limitations of the past, embracing both the fullness of her identity and the boundless potential of her future. She has become who she was always meant to be, and in that becoming, she finds peace.